Hi, this is Jamie Davis, the Pod Medic from the Mediccast podcast at www.mediccast.com, and I'm here with another MedicCast Extra video series on understanding shock this time. And this will be a brief overview, and actually there will be an expanded version of this shock segment as well as in-depth understanding segments on the individual types of shock available over at the MedicCast Extra site. But this is a great place to start and get a brief overview on shock. You know, shock is one of those things that as students in the medical field, we sometimes have a hard time wrapping our brains around it. It is, at its most basic part, very easy, but sometimes we get down into the details and we start feeling a little overwhelmed. So my goal here in this short segment is to really simplify shock, make it very easy to understand at its basic levels, and then you can start breaking that up and taking it piece by piece into a deeper understanding of the concepts surrounding shock. And that is the way we can help you go from this student to this student. A student who's confident, who has found online resources that are available, resources available like the MediccastExtra.com site. So what is shock? Shock is basically defined in many places as inadequate tissue perfusion. But what does that mean? Well, we remember that tissues need a constant supply of oxygen. Tissues need a constant supply of energy in the form of glucose. And tissues also require a way to get rid of waste products, and that is handled by the circulatory system. Anything that impedes this process can cause cells to die if they go without this life-saving perfusion long enough. Different tissues have different rates of cellular death involving inadequate tissue perfusion. The brain and the kidneys and the heart are three that really need rapid intervention to maintain perfusion when it is interrupted. Anything that causes an interruption in this tissue perfusion and interferes with the ability of the body to maintain homeostasis and perfuse these tissues is something that's going to cause shock. In fact, my friend Paul Bond from the Emergency Nursing Today podcast likes to say that shock is something that everybody eventually dies from. When we're looking at shock, we need to understand that shock is a very simple process at its most basic part. Shock involves the circulatory system, and there are three basic components to the circulatory system. We have the heart, we have the vessels, and we have the blood. And if you want to make that even a little bit simpler, we have the pump, we have the container, and we have the fluid. And that means that the pump is the heart, the container are the blood vessels, and the fluid is the blood. If there's any problem that affects any one of those three components, it will cause the body to slip into shock. And the body's ability to compensate for whatever the problem is will affect the body's progression in the shock process. Either it will resolve or it will continue to deteriorate to the point where it can no longer compensate and shock becomes decompensated. So we have the pump, the heart. You also have the container, the arterial blood supply, the capillaries, and the venous return system, represented very simply here. But I want you to think about it really as a container that fills with, of course, the fluid. The arterial blood, the oxygen-rich blood, and then the return blood, the oxygen-depleted, waste-containing blood that returns to the heart to be pumped back out into the system and be refreshed in the lungs and out into the system again. So when there's a problem with any of the components of this system, the body reacts. For example, the body, when it has a problem, will try to increase heart rate to increase the amount of blood that's pumped. It will increase contractility of the heart muscle to increase the output from the heart as well. It will also, if necessary, shrink the container, make the container smaller to enclose a lesser blood volume or to raise the blood pressure in an effort to increase the return of blood to the heart in order to maintain the system and the constant movement of the fluid. The body will begin to retain fluid by recouping fluid from the kidneys, and it will shift some fluid back into the vascular space. But that process usually takes a lot longer than the immediate process of the vascular clamping down or making the container smaller, and the heart's reaction by speeding up and increasing contractility. When we look at this in review, remember, shock is decreased tissue perfusion. The causes of shock are anything that affects the body's ability to perfuse the end tissues. There are 3 parts: the pump, the container, and the fluid. And the 3 types of shock, the 3 basic types of shock, relate back to the 3 parts. So this is your review. Of course, I always provide references, and there are a lot of other references available online if you look up shock, but these are the references you can look into. You can also head over to the Mediccast podcast website at Mediccast.com. You have a free weekly podcast there. And of course, if you're interested in more in-depth information, hundreds of extra files, go to the Mediccast-Extra.com. I'm Jamie Davis, the Pod Medic, reminding all of you to remember scene safety and BSI.